I'm Rick Hart. This is your APTN News Brief for Thursday, April 25th. We begin in British Columbia, where the BC Prosecution Office has announced that 3 RCMP officers will not face charges in the 2021 shooting death of a Wet'suwet'en father of 2. Tina House reports.
This doesn't end here. It's not over. It's time for Canada to stop protecting their gunmen who have been slaughtering our people for decades, centuries since contact.
It's been an emotional day for Laura Holland and her supporters, as they were just informed that 3 RCMP officers will not be facing any charges in the death of her son, 38-year-old Jared Lowndes, father of 2.
It has been 1,020 days that I have waited to hear what proposed charges might be, and there are none.
In 2021, Jared Lowndes was boxed in by police while in a Tim Hortons drive-thru in Campbell River, BC. They were there to serve a warrant, but things quickly escalated. A police dog was sent into the vehicle, and the dog was killed by Lowndes. Police then deployed a taser, then opened fire and killed Lowndes in his vehicle. Last year, we interviewed the head of the Independent Investigations Office about the Lowndes case.
I consider all of the actions of police, and I have to determine whether or not I believe there are reasonable grounds to believe that the police may have committed an offense, and more particularly, whether their actions were justified at law. And in this case, I've determined that there are reasonable grounds to believe that 3 officers may have committed an offense.
Despite those recommendations, the BC Prosecution Office released this statement. The available evidence does not meet the BCPS's charges assessment standard. The BCPS is not able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officers committed any offense in relation to the incident. As a result, no charges have been approved. Neil Chandler is the Lowndes family lawyer.
If not this case, it's hard to imagine a case meeting the charge approval standard. This was a case that we all thought clearly met that standard from the outside, and that would see a trial. And this is one of those cases where we would like to have seen justice be done.
For Laura, she is determined to keep fighting for justice for her son.
My next step is to burn it all down. I'm going to make sure that there are changes to policy and procedure.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
To Manitoba, where the Interlake Reserves Tribal Council, or IRTC, says a chief recently accused of child sex crimes has been removed from its board of directors. With seats for each of its 7 member First Nations, the board of the Manitoba Interlake Organization no longer includes Lake St. Martin Chief Chris Travers. Travers now faces charges on 4 offenses against an elementary school-aged child, including possession and creation of child pornography. A council press release states that the IRTC, quote, unequivocally condemns the actions alleged in the charges, unquote, and that they stand in support of the community. Lake St. Martin Councillor Brad Beardy will now act as the First Nations interim board member. The Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations was in Nova Scotia Tuesday, there to discuss the recently tabled budget, reconciliation, and the Liberals' Métis recognition legislation. Angel Moore reports.
Last week, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland announced the federal budget. Her speech was criticized for not mentioning Indigenous people or reconciliation. But Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anna-Desangare says reconciliation is a priority.
This budget was rolled out in a very different way than previous budgets. So in fact, there's a full chapter in the book on reconciliation. Today itself is our day on reconciliation to be announcing very specific items. The Prime Minister himself is making these announcements, as well as other ministers from across Canada.
Anna-Desangare spoke at a press conference held at Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, about 80 kilometers northwest of Halifax. The event was to highlight the budget investments towards reconciliation. APTN News asked Anna-Desangare about Bill C-53. If passed, it will recognize the Métis organizations of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario as self-governing bodies. It has been fiercely opposed by First Nations in Ontario, and last week, the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan withdrew its support.
Well, we received notice from President McCallum and the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. We are looking at next steps, and I'm waiting to hear advice from both our policy team as well as our legal advisors. And I think as we consult, we will figure out what the next steps ought to be.
Angel Moore, APTN National News, Wolfville, Nova Scotia.
The Ontario government has announced $500,000 in critical needs funding for Iyabmitung First Nation. It comes some 3 months after the nation's only school was razed by fire. Half of the funds will go towards community needs and students, including transition supports for grade 9ers who typically move to Thunder Bay for high school, 350 kilometers to the south. The remainder will go towards mental health and emergency food security needs made worse by the fire. The John C. Yesno Education Center went up in flames January 25th, displacing 300 K-9 students. 4 youth have been charged in connection with the fire. In February, the federal government announced $13 million to build a temporary school. And finally, HIV/AIDS is on the rise in Canada. And according to the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research, that makes the country unique among its G7 counterparts. Tina House has more.
HIV and AIDS is a worldwide epidemic, with 37 million people infected with AIDS. Jeff Rock is with the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. He says the latest numbers are alarming.
Canada currently is the only G7 country that still has a rising HIV/AIDS rate. Every other major country, every other G7 country in the world has managed to decline their HIV rate, but for some reason, the rates keep going up here in Canada.
Rock says that research shows that despite all the educational tools available, colonialism has a lot to do with the rising numbers for Indigenous people. Statistics Canada says that from 2020 to 2021, there was a 24% increase in new infections, and that number is continuing to climb.
A lot of shame and stigma was brought with settler peoples to this country, and I think because of that shame and stigma in the colonial project, the rising HIV rates continue within Indigenous communities and other marginalized communities, the 2S LGBTQAI community, other racialized communities as well. And so I think if we want to address the HIV rate in Canada, we need to continue the process of not only decolonization, but destigmatization.
Jesse Dame works with a community-based research center.
A lot of it is still not community-led. We like to speak about things being community-led, but a lot of the investment still focuses on the physical aspects of HIV prevention, which is absolutely important, but we need to continue down the path of mental, emotional, and spiritual connection to really look at prevention strategies for Indigenous folks.
Rock says there are easy solutions for those to get tested and then seek medications.
You can order through the mail a self-testing kit. There's a 1-800 number you can call and somebody will walk you through the test and you can get the results within minutes. Those are readily available to the most rural of Canadians in small towns through Canada Post, right up to anybody here in major cities. We have all of the tools in our toolkit to treat HIV, to get viral loads under control and down to zero so that it's untransmittable. We have all the toolkits. So nowadays, people aren't dying of AIDS at the same rates that they used to. People still are. It is still a serious condition that you need to get tested and treated for. But at the same time, it's not the life sentence that it used to be.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Thursday, April 25th. I'm Rick Harp.